Hello, listeners. Welcome to a new episode of the Blue Radio. Today, I will be broadcasting Anna's story. Anna's story is a story of generational trauma and how it can worsen pain and also resilience. Her story also involves mentions of sexual abuse, neglect, trafficking, and the Holocaust. So, if any of these topics trigger you, please listen with a trusted friend or professional. Anna asked me to include her Twitter handle in the caption of this episode, so I did that, and you can look at her account. So, without further ado, let's hear her story.
When I was 6 years old, I was abused. I was sexually abused. I was raped, actually, by my neighbors, and I was abused, sexually abused by it was a family, and they had 3 boys, and probably from the age of 6 to 10, there was consistent abuse. And I think sexual abuse, there were so many factors that came into play that made this abuse manifest in my life. My father, on my father's side of the family, he's second generation Holocaust. So he was actually born in a displacement camp overseas and came to America. And so there's a lot of generational trauma on my father's side. So we're dealing with that. And also he worked full time, so he wasn't in the home. And then my mother, she has abuse and incest in her lineage on her side of the family. And she struggled with depression and mental issues. And also she was out of the home working. So I had 2 absentee parents, and it wasn't that they were didn't love me or they weren't great parents. They just weren't around. And I'm 46, so also the times were different. The environment was different. There wasn't a lot of education. There wasn't a lot of social awareness with child abuse. It was also something that was considered on both sides of my family something you never spoke about. It was considered shameful. It was considered a very taboo, uncomfortable topic. So I think I remember I was fine. I actually have a memory up until I was 6 years old. Kind of these scattered memories. Everything was colorful. I remember. I remember myself. I remember feeling happy Then I remember when I went to the abuse. It was a slow, before the actual rape. The boys, when I would come around during the summer, my brother was a couple of years older. So we would go over to this home together every day during the summer. We were playing outside. That's what we did back then. Instead of all the Twitter and the video games, we actually played outside. So these were neighborhood kids. And I remember it started with just the boys making comments, wanting to kiss me, wanting to touch my breasts, and these were teenagers. So I was around 5 or 6, and these were 13, 14, 16-year-old boys. And I remember my life changing the moment the rape happened. I remember I was 6, and my brother and I went over to a sleepover at their home, and we were all sleeping in the same room with our sleeping bags and blankets. And it's only actually until the past few years I've had a clear memory of the abuse. It was something I remember when I met my husband. He asked about my childhood, and at that point, I had no memory of my childhood, and I could never figure out why. I thought it was very strange. And because I had blocked it all out. Um, we went over for a sleepover, and I remember we were in the living room sleeping on the floor. The boys and I was friends with. They had a sister. She was around my age, and so we were all sleeping. And it was about, I don't know, I would say the middle of the night. And our house was a few houses down from the neighbor's house, and it was the middle of the night, and I remember lying down and one of the boys started touching me under the blankets, my legs, and I remember, feeling uh, uncomfortable at that point, um, but not really understanding what that kind of touch meant. And then, I was so afraid to make a noise because everybody was sleeping, and the parents of this family were asleep in the other room. And one of the boys, one of the older boys, then went under the blanket and started to touch me in between my legs, and I was wearing underwear at the time. And there's something that happened where I remember the smell of the brown carpet next to my face. I remember the looking at the brown carpet for some reason. And I just remember kind of the smell of oak or something. I think trauma and smells are so connected and so strong. And the next thing I remember is one of the boys I remember his face, he had climbed on top of me, and I remember his face being very close to me. And I was very confused, and I think my main concern was not to make noise. For some reason, not to wake people up. My body, interestingly enough, thank God for Law and Order Special Victims Unit, honestly, and that's not a joke, because at the time, there was really, maybe it wasn't out by then because I'm 46, but as years went on, thank God for that show, because it started to bring up what happened, the events when I was 6. I remember the boy's face being very close to mine, and it was dark. And then I just remember this incredible pain in my vagina. And it was like a knife stabbing me. That's all I can remember, is I felt like I was being stabbed, and I was holding my breath, and I didn't want to scream, but I wanted to. And I just remember that brown carpet being sort of, how they say, survivors often speak of leaving their body during an assault, and that clearly happened with me. I remember being out of my body and kind of looking to the side of myself, lying down, and his head very close to mine, and just feeling the weight of my body, the weight of his body on me, which was something very new. And I just remember the pain down there. And inside, I was screaming, and I remember my body froze, and I don't remember too much after that, except for I remember the front door leaving in the middle of the night. without any of my things. I remember I was in my nightgown and I didn't have any underwear on. And I remember feeling incredibly cold. And I think it was a cold night as well. And I was crying and running down the street to my parents' house. And I remember kind of, I remember clearly walking or running along the street and passing the houses leading up to my house. And it was nighttime and everything felt very scary. Everything felt very cold. I was clearly in shock. I rang the doorbell. I remember the front door of my home, and I remember knowing my parents were asleep. And I rang the doorbell, and I was knocking on the door, and I remember my mother coming to the door and answering it, opening it up, and I just ran to her crying and screaming, and I was hysterical. And she asked what was wrong, and I just couldn't articulate it. I didn't know exactly what happened, but I was terrified. And she asked if I had a nightmare, and I said, well, I didn't say anything. We kind of left it as if I had a nightmare, and I had to leave because I was scared. So my mother, I remember, put me to bed. I didn't have my underwear on, and I remember so much pain down there for a few days. That's what I remember. My life after that moment changed so much. Before that, I remember feeling kind of similar to how I feel now as an adult, after working years with myself with trauma work and being diagnosed with complex PTSD. After that night, I remember I changed completely. I grew up having no friends, basically. I remember being alone all the time. And I actually spent most days in our laundry closet. It was this small linen closet, they call them, this small closet. And I would go in there with a flashlight and my books, my coloring books, and close the closet door. And there was no oxygen. It was completely dark. And I remember spending hours a day in there with this flashlight, and it was so oxygen deprived that, sometimes I would have to open the door and just kind of breathe, or my mother or somebody would come by and open the door and I would be kind of passing out because I couldn't breathe in there. But my behavior became very different after that. And I think my parents growing up in such a, sex was something shameful. The body was a very uncomfortable topic. Child abuse was definitely something I've never even heard of that expression growing up. And my behavior was absolutely bizarre looking back. And I start to remember a lot of stories. I asked my parents, what do you remember me about as a child? And because I still to this day, I have a very large gap. And I remember I have an incredible psychiatrist here, and I have to give a shout out, Dr. Robert Schulte. He's just a brilliant, very compassionate, empathic, incredible therapist. And I remember him telling me, I was very concerned about wanting to work through this trauma and these memories that I can't remember. And I remember him clearly saying to me, you don't have to remember what happened to heal the trauma in the brain. So I'm less fixated on remembering these memories. But clearly, in retrospect, my behavior changed. At night, I remember I couldn't sleep until my grandmother used to have all these nightgowns that she would give me, her old nightgowns. And, like moves, they walk around with these comfortable kind of things around the house dresses. And she used to give me her old house dresses. And before I would go to bed, I would tie about 12 or 15. It was very bizarre. Tie them around my head, tie tie them around my body, my legs, like a mummy. And when I was very close with my grandmother, probably the closer to her than my own mother, I would say. So looking back, I can see how that was my way of feeling comfortable enough to fall asleep. And to this day, even like last night, I had 2 hours of sleep. I still suffer from many of the symptoms of complex PTSD and trauma, insomnia, etc., flashbacks, even. But the abuse, the rape, that wasn't the first time I was raped. My brother and I had to go over there because my parents weren't around, and that's where the kids went, and everybody kind of felt safe about that. And I was abused by the three boys in the family, and I I feel sort of happy in a way. I can't remember everything, but I have flashbacks of faces near me. I have flashbacks of crying and being touched. Um, but was never the same after that. And I spent I'm 46, and have spent most of my life as I did as a child. Solitude was, I felt very alienated after that experience. I was looking there.
So, just to interrupt you, when you said that after this you felt different. So, in addition to feeling different from yourself, did you feel different from other kids in school and all of that?
It's a tough question, because if you're asking me as a 46-year-old adult now with my perspective, that's one answer. As a child, being 6 or however old I was, um, I have nothing to compare it to. So back, if I'm putting myself in my 6-year-old self, uh, of course you think it's normal. You think everybody feels like that, and it's very uncomfortable, because the way that you're handling it, the way that I handled it as a child, I'm looking to my peers and thinking these things are going on with them as well. They sleep in closets. They tie themselves up like a mummy to sleep. They accept. I couldn't understand why my peers were able to feel so comfortable socializing with each other. It looked like they could have fun playing. I remember I had no joy as a child. I don't remember feeling happy. Uh, I didn't understand actually what happy was.
Yeah.
And so I saw other children acting like children, and I felt much older than them. I felt also more. Um, I felt like I was responsible for more things than I should have been responsible for. Almost when I was in class, I was uh, less of a participant with my peers and more always kind of looking from the outside, and sort of identifying with the teacher, almost somebody who is separate from my peer group.
So, when you felt separate and you didn't participate in other kids' games or in social activities, did anybody at that time ask, or when you ask your parents, the question of what I was like as a child, as you said earlier that you had asked them, do they mention the fact that this was strange for them, or they try to find out why this was happening?
You know, there's just uh, it's so complex. They were so scared as young parents. They were so distracted. They really were not too privy of what I was doing and what my experience was. We really didn't have a lot of structure in the house. I would say there was a lot of neglect um, with two working parents. I don't remember meals on the table. I don't remember sometimes food being around. Um, I remember uh, having, I don't remember my parents too much in my younger days. And I think they actually really didn't have a lot of input when I asked them about my childhood. Uh, I don't think, I think they were struggling. So there wasn't a lot of feedback from them about that time.
So they didn't address the situation at all.
I never told anybody except for about 2 years ago, and so
I mean, like addressing the fact that you felt you didn't have any friends, or you were playing in a linen closet. Anybody in your nobody in your family asked you why are you playing in a linen closet, or don't have any friends, or things like that.
no, I think, and I think that's what neglect is a lack of,
Yes.
it's a big definition, but I think it's a lack of interest, a lack of awareness of what your child, what's going on.
And, oh, sorry. I just wanted to ask another question. Well, you said something about Law and Order series that it's when it came out. I don't know when it came out. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm Iranian. I don't know these American shows, but uh, like when I was curious that when was the time that you understood exactly what happened to you? Was it around the time that you understood what sex was? So when was time that you understood this was what happened to me?
After that, I had trouble in school. I remember that. I was smart. I remember teachers getting frustrated why I wasn't kind of stepping up to the plate and asking my parents, but it wasn't addressed. I remember being after that. I identified with men. Sex was never explained to me ever. We never had that talk. I still didn't know what it was. I didn't know what happened to me. I never even thought about it. I did think it was something normal. I
Um,
compare not being raped at 6'2", so it was normal. But as years went on, I was very susceptible to further abuse and assaults. And I kind of look at my life in three chapters, and I am getting to Law and Order. um, my childhood, and then sort of my life up until my late 30s, and then or probably my mid 30s, and then up until now 46. um, After the child abuse, I was actually trafficked and raped multiple times, abused multiple times, and to me, that segue and that transition and being taken advantage of, I think I had a target on my head. That's the only way. I come from a family where nobody really knew what was going on with me, and checking about my whereabouts. And um,
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you to elaborate about the circumstances of your trafficking. If you're comfortable, how did it happen? When did it start? Again, in as much detail as you're comfortable.
Yeah. The confusing part was complex PTSD. It was interesting. I was raped when I was 14, and by my music teacher, actually, piano teacher. And it was the time around, I think, when AIDS was on the cover of Time magazine. So I started to become aware that there was something called sex. There was something very scary. I really didn't know what was happening. And through that individual and that experience, I was trafficked. And I still didn't quite understand what that was about either. And I was sort of lured out. I was very proud of myself. I got into college, and I was in my first year in Boston at Tufts and the Museum School of Fine Arts, um, and I was groomed quite a bit by an individual, a man affiliated with the school. And you know, it's difficult to answer that questions directly, because there were so many traumas piling on, so many events that my brain and body were unable to process consistently. Sexual assault after sexual assault, a lot of grooming and manipulation. So at this point, you know, I then one day find myself traveling around the world with people holding my passport and going to places and not quite understanding what was happening, and being forced to have sex with men. And it's interesting because the only thing I remember was number one, I don't want my parents to find out what's happening. Faking like I was okay and I was normal to the outside world was extremely important to me. I was very ashamed of what was going on. I wanted to always appear that I was strong and in control, and I was not being abused and degraded or disrespect, or I don't know what I'm not finding the words. I just remember feeling the majority of my life very ashamed and very scared people would find out what's happening to me. You know, and my brother is very successful professional, and he's a physician. So there was this a lot of shame and a lot of pressure sort of put on me and what was happening in my life. And when I was trafficked, I really had no idea it was called trafficking. I had no idea what was going on. It took me so many years to first of all wrap my head around what was happening, because I didn't have a name for it. And what was interesting is I remember being overseas, and I was in Europe. I think I was in London. This time I was trafficked, and I was in a hotel room, and the TV came on. You know, I watched a lot of TV, and Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, Dick Wolf, Mariska Hargitay came on, and I love their marathons still to this day. The song is like a lullaby, it puts me to sleep, and it touched me in a way that was very uncomfortable, yet very supportive in a bizarre way, because I started to watch every episode and started to identify with each episode, something in each episode. So I was saying, oh shit, something happened to me. Okay, so Was I raped, drugged and raped? Okay, that happened to me. Then the next episode come on, it was be about an 8-year-old being sexually abused. And I was like, well, wait, that happened to me too. Then I really started to understand, wow, something is going on in my brain and my body. Something has happened to me. But there were so many things that I really couldn't get to the bottom of it. I was like, and then of course, I'm getting educated about human trafficking through Law and Order. I'm speaking about Law and Order Special Victims Unit because the only way I got out of this situation and escaped this situation and healed myself is only because I heard other survivor stories, and only because there was some kind of awareness in the media, whether it was a TV show or that was it. And so slowly I realized that what was happening to me was very, very bad. It was very, very organized, and it would lead to very bad things for me down the road. So at that point, I started to operate less as a victim and shifting more to the survivor mentality of being incredibly aware of my surroundings, incredibly aware of the people I was with, incredibly aware of any opportunity around me to leverage to direct my situation, my life, to go down another path.
So I just want to ask that as you were an adult and healing, how do you think that your previous, so you talked about how when you were a child, you weren't able to connect with other children. Now that you're talking about your adulthood and your healing story, do you, how do you think that your childhood trauma and then the trafficking experiences impacted your relationship with other adults this time, friends, partners, things like that?
Still to this day, it's hard for me. My life on a day-to-day basis, it's a lonely life when you suffer from child abuse. I developed eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia. I developed many addictions. I was always kind of smart about it. I said, well, what is the least worst addiction I could have where I'm not going to end up on the street homeless or ODing or dying? I thought about suicide every single day. It still occasionally is a faint thing that crosses my brain. I realize I do actually have brain damage, which affected my human development. So I do have, cognitive deficiencies. My relationships, it's been very difficult still to this day to maintain friendships. And the friendships I have a couple very good friends who've been by me for years. As romantic relationships, I was terrified. I had two personas. One was I first of all, I had trouble holding down a nine to five work. I was in bed most of the time, chronically ill. There was so much abuse done. I had so much sexual abuse. I went through 11 to 13 surgeries for different issues, and eventually having a hysterectomy. So chronic health issues in my reproductive system. So most of the time it was healing from surgery in my bed, and I remember being online getting a paralegal degree from UC Berkeley and realizing I was not fitting into the norm in life, and I had to find a way to financially support myself and a way to function. So I worked with that, but I really had no friends, and I really could not have a relationship with a man. When I met my husband, it was very interesting. At the time, I started my own work, working with veterans and trauma women. veterans and with PTSD, and just sort of, I started a group, a support group, where we exchange resources and how to help each other. And I met my husband through that. And I remember when I was terrified of dating. I was, when I was younger, I was incredibly sexually active at an early age. And then I was very uncomfortable with it the older I got. But my husband noticed I had this huge iron wall around me, and he actually, I married him because he was the first person in my life who was like, what the hell is behind there? He actually wanted to know more about me, which was a new thing, because most people, I was so used to dealing with such a superficial level with men just wanting sex or whatever. So I didn't, when I met my husband, which was only, a few years ago, actually, I had no idea. I was so used to being two different people that I really had no, it was normal to me. It wasn't that I was terrified, of course, of him ever finding out about my past. But eventually, it came to a point where I realized, in order to not end up alone in my life, and I wanted to change very desperately to not be lonely, not be alone. And I delve headfirst into therapy, and actually, we never talked about the sexual abuse with my husband. It was more of the fact that I was so out of control with an eating disorder at the time, and so out of control with, just horrible insomnia. And I started to address these byproducts of the abuse and of the trauma. And when I started to address those things, the addiction and the eating disorder, then the child abuse came up, and it became very clear kind of where everything shifted, and sort of where I took that different path.
I wanted to ask this. I usually don't ask this from survivors, but you've talked
Question.
about a journey with a lot of ups and downs, and with a lot of trauma. And I mean, you have been extremely resilient to just go through this and sit in front of me, looking great, talking great, and
Oh, it's a shower and a little lip gloss, as
I
girl.
just really admire you. So tell me about you now.
Um, I made it for two reasons. One is because my grandparents on my father's side are Holocaust survivors, meaning the stories I grew up hearing as a child were not normal stories. My grandmother sat at my bed, and I would hear, tucking me in at night, hearing stories about when she was 16, the Germans, Nazis, came into her home in Poland, lined her whole family up outside, shot her 7 brothers, her parents, her grandparents, left her alive, gang raped her, hit her overhead with a gun, and then said, "We left you alive because we want you to tell your community what's about to happen to everybody." And stories where she had given birth during the war, and they were hiding in a barn, and she had to kill her own child because it was making noise, and the other survivors would be found by the Germans and heard in their hiding place. So I think these stories were so important for me, because during my life, when I found myself in situations, I remember wanting to kill myself every time I was raped. Every time I've had 5 abortions from rape. I would get pregnant, they would take me somewhere to have it done. And I remember, at my worst, my grandparents' stories would come into my heart and into the forefront of my mind. And so I remember always saying to myself, well, my God, if they made it, I sure as hell can make it through this. And I remember something very important my grandmother told me. She said that when the Holocaust survivors, you know, uh, came to America or Israel or wherever they transplanted after the war, I remember she said there was such incredible PTSD, such incredible trauma, mind blowing trauma, that she said there were only two types of survivors who go through horrible stuff. There's one group that gives in to the pain and gives into the suffering, and 9 out of 10 times ends up in suicide. And then there's the other group, and they say, this is really bloody horrible. I feel horrible every single day. They're very, but they made a conscious decision to say, I will live. And another important piece to that is not only there was a group of people that said, I choose to live. They took that pain and what they went through and were able to, my grandparents especially, transform it into helping others. And actually, my grandparents, Spielberg filmed my grandparents in a documentary that's in the Holocaust Museum in DC, which I still can't go and see, but that decision to use that pain, because there were no antidepressants back then. She didn't have Xanax. They didn't even diagnose PTSD or CPTSD and all that. So she worked with the raw basics, her and my grandfather, my grandparents, with that pain, that anger, that confusion, that displacement, disorientation, and took that raw energy and simply just transformed it into service, into advocacy, and cultivated a tremendous amount of compassion and empathy for people, and created holding spaces for other survivors and support. And I remember my grandmother saying that kept her going on her worst days is when she was able to connect with other survivors and empower them, and which of course makes sense to me. Growing up with all this trauma, there is still a feeling of mental and emotional claustrophobia with this trauma, where you really almost a self-centeredness. You're so trapped inside your brain and in your body that I find myself naturally, I have moved towards advocacy, getting outside of myself, connecting with others, and helping. And naturally, that relieves that internal congestion inside of myself. And so for me, that's been a healing path.
Well, thank you for sharing this. And I mean, I'm very sorry for what your grandparents had to go through. And it's just incredible. It's really unbelievably incredible. And I can't say this enough that they took this and turned this into advocacy. And you took your trauma, this terrible experiences that you've gone through to help people, to empower other survivors. It's just very amazing. I really admire you. My last question is going to be that um, if you were to go back in time as an adult and face your childhood self, your adolescent self, your young self, what would you tell her?
That, that is a really difficult, that's an odd question. I know inner child work is so key to healing child abuse, but frankly, I would tell her, I would say, honey, the next 40 years of your life are going to be hell. You are going to experience so much pain and suffering. What just happened to you? What is mind-blowingly horrible. And I don't think there's much to say to my childhood self except affirmation and confirmation that I am and was wickedly beautiful inside and smart and awesome and full of joy, and that whatever these the darkness that has kind of coated my brain and my heart actually has not ruined me. That I would tell her that there is a part of you, a strength that has been untouched since the beginning by the abuse and is still with me today. And it's still that same exact place that I connect with. And I just real quickly want to say that my advocacy, I'm so passionate about advocacy and support. I met you on Twitter. So I am on Twitter, but I'm launching a nonprofit, the Bright Wealth Foundation, in fall 21 for survivors of child abuse and healthcare professionals and advocates who wish to participate to have this movement go forward and heal many people. And another quick thing I have to add is that it's very unfortunate. I started this nonprofit because it's unfortunate that a lot of the treatments, and of course our healthcare system, the treatments that do work for people diagnosed with PTSD, CPTSD, are very expensive. There's ketamine transfusions. There's a lot of stuff out there, incredible psychotherapists, but it costs money. And this is a tough system. I think it's sort of rigged to fall through the cracks with people suffering from trauma. So that is what I know. I would not be alive today if it wasn't for the random acts of kindness and generosity to pay for treatments that I've received, etc. So that is what the foundation is all about, is simply getting people what they need to heal.
So getting funding for abuse survivors toward their healing journey. Wow.
Their healing journey and implementing whatever they need, whatever that looks like for them.
Right.
And into their journey. So, I'm sorry. And also, I would love to tell everybody my Twitter handle. This is my first social media, so forgive me. I'm still actually learning how to figure Twitter out. I was terrified of it also because of Law and Order taught me that there are a lot of sexual predators out there, so I was very reluctant to start a Twitter account at first. So I started with the name Alberto Peschetti, which makes no sense probably to you, but it made me laugh. It sounded like an older Italian gentleman, but I have now changed it to Anna McClain. So it's ANNAMCLAINE, and at simply Anna McClain, where you can find me. And I would love to speak to anybody. I'm an open book. I've been through it all. I don't judge, and I care.
I'm glad that Anna chose to speak up and share her story with me. Sharing a story like hers is not easy, and I admire every survivor who has spoken up and who is planning to speak up very much, because it's not easy, and it will empower other victims and survivors too. So if you're out there and you have chosen to speak up and share your story, I admire you. And if you have not shared your story yet, I know it's difficult, and I hope it becomes easier for you. With that, I will end this episode. Thank you for listening.